All right, let's jump into this. We're going to be looking at Druids today. You sent over a ton of material on them. Seems like that one big online encyclopedia is where most of it's from.
Ah, yes, I can see why they fascinate people.
Yeah, lots of mystery surrounding them.
Exactly. Peel back the layers, separate fact from fiction. Should be fun.
Definitely. And I think everyone kind of has that one image in their head when they hear Druid. You're right, like those guys hanging out in the woods with big oak trees.
Right, that's the classic image, yeah. And it's not entirely wrong.
Oh, so oak trees are involved.
Well, the connection comes from Pliny the Elder. He was a Roman writer, naturalist. And he linked the word druid to the Gaulish word for oak.
Gaulish, that's ancient France, right?
Exactly. So there's definitely a connection to trees there. But modern scholars think the meaning goes deeper, more like one with firm knowledge.
So not just about the oaks themselves, but like deep knowledge, wisdom.
Yeah, think of it like rooted in knowledge. Makes sense considering their role as knowledge keepers, teachers, advisors.
Hmm, that's interesting. And it's funny you say rooted because this is where it gets weird. Well, in Irish and Welsh tradition, the word druid can also refer to a wren.
A wren, the tiny bird.
Yep, those little guys flitting around. Who knew they had such a connection to powerful figures like druids, right?
That's pretty wild. And actually, when you think about it, the wren does have a lot of symbolism in Celtic lore, prophecy, insight, that sort of thing.
So maybe they saw something similar in those little birds, like
Mm.
this hidden knowledge, deep wisdom.
Could be. Always more than meets the eye with this stuff.
That's for sure. And speaking of more than meets the eye, we tend to think of druids as just being like priests, right?
Yeah.
Religious leaders.
Right, that's the common perception,
Yeah.
but it's way more complex than that.
Yeah, because even Caesar, when he wrote about them, he described them as not just religious figures, but judges, advisors to kings, like really involved in their society.
Oh, absolutely. Caesar's account actually lines up pretty well with Irish and Welsh sources, too. Druids had a really high social standing. They were exempt from military service, didn't have to pay taxes.
Wow, talk about perks. Sounds like a pretty sweet gig if you could get it.
Right. Although becoming a druid, that was no easy feat. We're talking serious commitment.
Yeah, wasn't their training like super intense? Something about 20 years of memorizing everything?
20 years all memorized. They weren't allowed to write anything down. Can you imagine?
My brain hurts just thinking about it. All that knowledge stored up there. But why? Why all the secrecy, no writing allowed?
Well, some scholars think it was about control, keep the knowledge exclusive, makes the druids even more powerful.
Makes sense. Yeah, knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. Others think it was more about really honing their memory, making them incredibly sharp and precise.
So like a mental workout, pushing their brains to the limit. And honestly, knowing how much Celtic culture valued storytelling, oral history.
Yeah, it fits right in. They clearly placed a lot of importance on the spoken word, on memory.
Makes you wonder how much got lost over time, though, right? With no written records.
It's true. We rely a lot on what outsiders said about them, the Romans, Greeks, and so on. But those observations do seem to match up with what we know about Celtic culture as a whole.
Right, so even if we don't have all the details, we can piece together a pretty good picture.
That's the fun of it, trying to solve this historical puzzle.
Okay, so we've got this picture of druids as these wise, powerful figures, keepers of knowledge. But then there's that other side, the darker side, that people always talk about.
You're talking about human sacrifice.
Yeah, that's the one. The Romans, especially Caesar, they really went all in on describing those rituals. The Wicker Man, criminals being sacrificed, maybe even innocent people.
Hmm.
Pretty gruesome stuff.
Right, and that's where things get tricky. We have to remember the Romans had their own motives for portraying their enemies like that.
Propaganda, right.
Exactly. Make the people you're conquering seem like barbarians. Justifies your actions. Makes you look good.
So how much of that was just them playing it up, making it sound worse than it was?
Archaeologists have looked at sites that were initially thought to be proof of human sacrifice. Grenay-sur-Aronde in Gaul, for example.
Angar, what did they find?
Well, it's a complex site. Some interpretations suggest it was actually a burial ground for honored warriors, not victims. Lots of debate about it still.
So the human sacrifice thing, it's not so clear-cut.
Not at all. We have to look at all the evidence, consider different perspectives. Does it really fit with what we know about Druids from other sources? Their emphasis on wisdom, justice, nature.
It's like trying to figure out if these pieces of the puzzle actually belong together.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying the Druids so fascinating. There's always more to uncover.
Okay, well, let's move away from the spooky stuff for a minute, because there's another aspect of Druidic belief that I find super interesting. Caesar mentioned that they had this idea of, well, we might call it reincarnation.
Oh, you mean the soul traveling from one body to another after death?
That's the one. Pretty advanced concept for back then, right?
Definitely not what you'd expect. And what's even more interesting is that it echoes ideas from ancient Greece, the Pythagoreans.
So maybe there was some exchange of ideas happening that we don't even know about.
It's possible. The ancient world was more interconnected than we often think, and this reincarnation idea, it's not just a footnote either. It pops up again in Irish mythology, tales about heroes and their past lives.
Ooh, foreshadowing. I love it. So we've got these complex figures, right? It may involved in some dark rituals, but also holding these profound philosophical beliefs. Kind of makes you wonder how all of that played into their role in Celtic society in those myths and legends.
Well, that's where things get really exciting.
Uh-huh.
Because in Irish stories, the Druids are like major players, powerful advisors, prophets with incredible insight. Some even have magical
Like
abilities.
Merlin, right? The classic wizard archetype.
Exactly. But these stories, they weren't just entertainment. They reflected what Celtic people valued, their beliefs about the world, wisdom, knowledge, the power of nature. The Druids embodied all of that.
Got any good examples? A specific myth that really highlights their role.
Oh, tons. But one that comes to mind is the tale of Cathbad. He was the chief druid in the court of King Conchobar of Ulster. And he had this ability to see into the future, predict what was going to happen.
Andy.
Right. Well, in this one story, Cathbad predicts that this woman, Deirdre, she's going to grow up to be incredibly beautiful, but it's going to lead to war and tragedy. And the king, Conchobar, he basically ignores the warning.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, things played out exactly as Cathbad predicted. Tragedy, heartbreak, the whole 9 yards.
Even kings didn't want to mess with the Druids then. Makes you wonder why he didn't listen, knowing this guy could see the future.
Right, but that's the power of myths, isn't it? They explore human choices, consequences. Even kings make mistakes. And it shows the Druids, they weren't just advisors, they were like voices of warning, trying to guide people.
Speaking of challenging assumptions, we always picture Druids as these old men with beard. Wise, but kind of, stereotypical.
Yeah, that image is hard to shake. But guess what? The sources actually mention female Druids too.
No way. So it wasn't just a boys' club.
Not at all. We tend to project our own ideas about gender onto the past, but in Celtic society, women held positions of power, spiritual authority, and that included being Druids.
Okay, so tell me more. Who were these powerful women?
Well, in Irish stories, you have the Ban Druid, which literally translates to woman druid.
So they were recognized as a distinct role.
Yeah, they were advisors, prophets, some even had magical abilities just like their male counterparts. You have Bodmal, who fostered the legendary hero Fionn MacCumhale, and Plátka, this powerful druids connected to important festivals. And then there are the Galazene.
The what man?
The Galazene. These were priestesses who lived on an island off the coast of Brittany. All women, no men allowed. They were believed to control the winds and seas, had healing powers, could predict the future.
Wow, talk about girl power. Sounds like they didn't need men at all on that island.
Right. It really challenges our assumptions about what a druid could be. Shows that spiritual authority wasn't limited by gender in Celtic society.
That's awesome. So we've got these complex, powerful figures, both men and women, playing all these different roles. But what eventually happened to them? Did they just vanish after the Romans conquered Gaul and Britain?
Ah, that's the big question. Did they disappear completely, or did their traditions somehow survive in a new form?
Ooh, cliffhanger. Don't tell me we have to wait till next time to find out.
Afraid so, but trust me, it's a story worth waiting for.
All right, fine. You've piqued my curiosity. We'll have to pick this up next time and see what became of these mysterious Druids.
It's like their story just continues, even though their world is long gone.
Right. And it makes you wonder, when did this whole Druid revival thing start? Like, when did people become so obsessed with them again?
Well, it really took off in the 18th century. Think about what was happening back then. The Enlightenment, the Romantic movement, all this focus on nature, emotion, the power of the imagination.
And the Druids, they fit right into that, huh? Mysterious figures from the past, connected to nature, ancient wisdom. Sounds pretty romantic to me.
Exactly. Artists, writers, they were all over it. You see Druids popping up in paintings, poems, novels, even operas. There's one by Bellini, Norma. It's about a Druid priestess in Roman-occupied Gaul.
They became this kind of symbol, a way for people to explore their own ideas about spirituality, nature, all that.
Yeah, and as interest grew, people wanted more than just stories. They wanted to experience those beliefs, those practices firsthand. That's where Neo-Druidism comes in.
Right, the modern version. But I imagine there are lots of different interpretations, right? Not just one way to be a neo-Druid.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pretty diverse movement. Some groups focus on nature worship, reverence for the earth. Others are more about meditation, personal growth. And some incorporate Celtic mythology, those old stories we were talking about.
So they're taking those ancient ideas and
Yeah.
adapting them to the modern world.
Exactly. And it's interesting to see how those ideas resonate with people today. Maybe there's something about that connection to nature, to something bigger than ourselves that we've lost touch with.
Makes you wonder if there's something we can learn from them, right? Even though their world was so different from ours.
Definitely. But let's not get too carried away with the modern stuff. Let's go back to the source, the actual archaeological evidence. What have we actually found that tells us about the Druids?
Yeah, because we've been talking a lot about what other people said about them. But what about the Druids themselves? Did they leave anything behind?
Well, that's the tricky part. See, the Druids didn't build big temples or write things down. Their practices were very much tied to nature, and their knowledge was mostly oral, so finding direct evidence is tough.
Bummer. So we're basically working with scraps, trying to piece together this puzzle.
Pretty much. But we do have some intriguing finds. Remember we were talking about human sacrifice?
Yeah, the Wicker Man thing. Still gives me the chills.
Well, archaeologists have found evidence of ritualistic practices at some Iron Age Celtic sites. Burials that suggest human sacrifice might have been part of their belief system.
So maybe the Romans weren't making it all up.
It's possible. But again, we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions. More research is needed. There's also the Druid of Colchester.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Who was this guy?
Well, it's actually a skeleton, found in England, buried with all sorts of interesting objects, surgical instruments, herbs, and these weird spoons with holes in them.
Spoons with holes. What were those for?
Nobody knows for sure. Some archaeologists think they were used for divination, like dripping liquids and interpreting the patterns.
Ooh, spooky. So this guy was maybe a healer, a ritual specialist, maybe even a druid.
Could be. It shows how connected they were to the natural world, how they sought knowledge through observation, interpretation.
Like reading the stars, the flight of birds.
Exactly. Always looking for signs, trying to understand the forces at work in the world. And then there's the Deal Warrior burial.
Another burial. What's special about this one?
Well, this warrior was buried with a bronze headdress. Super intricate, delicate, not something you'd wear in battle, more like a ceremonial piece.
So maybe he was more than just a warrior.
That's what some archaeologists think. The headdress resembles later depictions of Romano-British priests. So some speculate he might have been a religious figure, maybe even a druid.
Interesting. So we have these tantalizing hints, but no definitive proof. The mystery continues.
That's part of what makes it so fun, right? Trying to figure out who these people were, what they believed, how they lived.
It's like we're detectives piecing together clues from the past.
Exactly. And even though we may never have all the answers, the search itself is fascinating. It's a reminder that history is full of mysteries, and sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones we have to work for.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from ancient rituals to modern revivals. But let's bring things back to the present for a minute. Because the Druids, they haven't just stayed in the history books. It's like they've become this pop culture phenomenon. I mean, you see them everywhere.
It's true. Books, movies, TV shows, you name it. They've even found their way into video games.
And of course, there's the whole Neo-Druidism movement, which we talked about earlier. People are actually trying to revive those ancient traditions.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that after all this time, those ideas still hold so much power. Reverence for nature, wisdom, the connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It makes you wonder, what was it about that time period that still speaks to us today? Like, what were the Druids tapping into that we've maybe lost touch with?
Well, for one thing, they lived in a world where nature was everything. They observed the seasons, the stars, the cycles of life and death. It was all interconnected.
And they incorporated that into their beliefs, their practices. It was a way of life, not just something you read about in a book.
Right. And they weren't just passively observing nature either. They were actively working with it, using their knowledge of plants, herbs, all that, for healing, divination.
So it was this holistic approach. connecting the spiritual and the practical. I can see why that would appeal to people today.
Absolutely. Neo-Druidism really embraces that holistic view. Personal growth, connection to nature, community. It's about finding that balance, that harmony.
It's like the Druids, both ancient and modern. They're reminding us of something important, something we've maybe forgotten along the way.
Respect for nature, the search for wisdom, nurturing our spiritual side. These are timeless values, really.
Well said. So as we wrap up this exploration of the Druids, it's clear they were much more than just some mysterious figures from the past. They were philosophers, teachers, healers, keepers of ancient wisdom.
And their legacy continues to inspire us, doesn't it? To connect with nature, explore our spirituality, and maybe rediscover some of that wisdom they held so dear.
It's been a wild ride, uncovering all these layers of their world, from their roles in Celtic society to their impact on modern spirituality.
And who knows what else we might discover as archaeologists keep digging, as we keep learning more about these fascinating figures.
Exactly. The mystery continues. But that's part of the fun, isn't it? Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of the Druids. We hope you learned something new and maybe even feel inspired to do some exploring of your own.